All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you all for joining today. Welcome to our very first She Leads Spotlight course, How to Draft a Resume That Stands Out. My name is Tracy DeSoto. I am on the, on the board of directors for the Arizona Foundation for Women, and I am the program chair for She Leads. And we're very excited to bring this first ever Spotlight course to you. And I would like to introduce my co-facilitator, Christina Ruppel. Her name says Theo, but her name is Christina Ruppel. So if you want to introduce yourself, Christina.
Hello, everybody. Like Tracy said, I'm Christina Ruppel, and I am a creative content and development manager at University of Phoenix. I have helped facilitate many sessions through my career, and I'm really excited to co-facilitate today with all of you.
Great, thanks, Christina. If you have any questions, I'm going to be asking you some questions along the way, and if you would use your Q&A to answer, we will be monitoring that so that we can get all of your questions answered, and we will likely have time at the end of this presentation before our hour is up to answer any other questions that you have. And we will give you information at the end on how you can connect with us in other ways. So we are going to go ahead and get started. Today, we're going to cover the new rules for resumes, how to be very clear on your objectives. We're going to talk about how to choose an effective resume design and identifying the skills and finding those gaps, and then how to grow your network. All right, so I'm going to ask you a question, and if you'd please answer in the Q&A, and I can no longer see that, Christina, so hopefully you can.
Just really quick, Tracy, I'm sorry. Somebody asked if this recording will be on the She Leads portal. It will, correct?
It will, yes. We are going to put that on the portal for you all. So my first question for you all is, why do you think it's so tough to get a resume noticed? So if you can throw some answers in the Q&A and Christina will read them out, we will see what you think. Any responses yet? Oh, I see a couple coming through.
So they all look similar, bad punctuation.
Yes, and it's tough to get noticed because of the sheer volume. Often when a application is, or a job position is posted, hundreds of applications come in. So making yours stand out can be a very, very tough task. So we want to talk about, it's not simply a list of your job duties. It's not an autobiography or a statement of what you want to get out of a job. Your resume is an advertisement that tells employees what's in it for them if they choose you. And the only way it'll get noticed is if you make it clear and obvious how you can help them achieve their goals. So one of the biggest changes in the modern job search, especially over the past few years, is the involvement of AI. And what that is you all well know, is artificial intelligence. And it's called an applicant tracking system. So did you know that recruiters, the ATS is, so I'm sorry, my screen went blank again. Odds are that the first person who is going to see your resume is not a person at all. It will be an application tracking system, and it simply looks for keywords to see if you're a match for the position, so then it might get in the hands of an actual recruiter. And then if it does get into the hands of a live person, guess how many seconds they actually scan your resume? How long on the first glance, how often recruiters spend looking at your resume for the first time? What do you think?
So we have 20 seconds as a guess.
Much lower. Recruiters only spend an average of 6 seconds on their first scan of your resume. So if what they see doesn't stand out in 6 seconds, it's likely your resume will be passed over. That's why it's so tough to get noticed. So first of all, like I said, your resume could be one of hundreds. So don't make it your only job search effort. And second, your resume will be reviewed by computers and humans. So we want to optimize it for both. And finally, your resume will be quickly scanned at first, but it will be carefully scrutinized if it passes that first test. So we need to make it relevant, easy to read, and focused on your impact. All right, so next slide, please. There we go. So how to be clear on your objectives? Well, the most important step into writing a resume is to focus on how you can add value. It's not a depiction of what you want out of the role. And if you don't know how you can add value, it's going to be very difficult to write a resume that stands out. Everything you write should be to show the employer that you understand what's important to them and that you're the best person to help them achieve their goals. That's what it means to tailor your resume to the job. Whenever you find yourself navigating a career change or a new career journey, it's really important to start with your end goal in mind. A lot has changed over the past year, past several years, but many changes have happened in this past year. And a lot has changed in our world, in our lives, in our careers. And so it's no surprise that you may have some career goals that have changed as well. Making your resume match that is super important. So before you roll up your sleeves and dive into the mechanics of the search itself, you want to take some time to create some space, some moments for some mindful reflection about what you actually want in the next chapter of your career. It's critical to take time to pause, to do some reflection and some deep inner work. It's really important that you be very kind and patient with yourself during this time, because what you're essentially doing is reflecting back on all of your experiences, your memories of projects you've done, of committees you've been on, everything you've learned to date, and really thinking about what it is that you want next. And if you don't take the time to reflect in this way, you might be so busy hustling in your job search that you might end up taking something that you don't really want, or setting yourself up for an unsustainable career. So whatever it is you want to do next, I don't know if you've experienced that, but I've known many people who do. They take whatever's available and then they end up unhappy. So some questions to ask yourself and to consider during this reflection. And I know it doesn't seem like the best use of time, but it is so important. So some questions you might consider are, what kind of pay do I need to get out of my next job? What kind of flexibility or geographic constraints am I working with here? With the increase in remote work, that can be a game changer now. There are many people who just aren't willing to go into the office anymore, and we're seeing that more and more every day. People want to be flexible and be able to work wherever they are. And then you want to be clear, absolutely clear about what you don't want. What type of work drains your energy? What kind of work are you looking to avoid at all costs? Sometimes it's honestly easier to start with what you don't want. And then finally, clarify what you would absolutely love to do next, and give yourself permission to dream big. Because once you've identified what you want, then it becomes easier to clarify what your must-haves are, and then just what are nice-to-haves. And that'll help enable you to really create a rubric for what it is that you want out of your next career chapter. I always tell people when I'm working with them on their career pathing to aim high and compromise later. You have to start with your big end goal in mind and know that you can always pivot or change. You can always compromise based on what you're seeing on the market, but go after that impossible goal. You're very likely more qualified than you think you are. An important call out about knowing what your skills are is that you should highlight everything in the role should match a skill that you have. And we're going to talk a lot about that and show you some examples. If the information that you most want to highlight is not at the top third of that page, those 6 seconds are not going to see it, and it might likely get passed over. So it may not get seen if you don't really focus on how you build your resume. You want to highlight how you can add value. And what you don't want to do is create an objective statement about what you want, because employers don't necessarily care about what you're looking to get out of the role. They want to know what value you are going to bring to them and their team. So let's go ahead and look at some examples. All right, So first of all, if you're using an objective statement, it's time to stop. It may be time to lose that and replace it with what we call a professional profile. So it's much more impactful to the hiring manager. And here's a difference between an objective statement and a professional profile. So this objective statement says, to obtain a leader role where I can learn new skills and technologies to positively impact my career journey, I'm looking to join a positive environment where I can develop skills that will assist in organizational goals. In summary, I'm eager to join a collaborative team where I can learn from a diverse group of individuals and hone my skills as a leader. Now that sounds really great, but what's in it for the employer? So let's look at that next example. So here's what a professional profile looks like. Experienced leader, successful in operationalizing learning strategies, accomplished in creating strategies and systems to develop learning programs that support the development of employees and organizational outcomes. Skillful in curriculum development, facilitating, program management, and success coaching. Excel in the areas of leadership development, coaching for success, career progression, and personal development. Expert in leading teams and coaching both in person and virtually while maintaining excellent results in key performance indicators. So in the Q&A box, what do you see the difference? What do you notice? Well, we can see that in the first objective, it's all about the employee. It's what they want. Here's what I want out of this role, and this is what I would like you to give me. In the professional profile, it really shows what value this person is going to bring to the team, and that's really enticing to hiring managers.
And Tracy, on the Q&A, they also mentioned there is no I being used. We're not talking about what I want.
Absolutely. Yep. It's all about what you can give and what value you can bring. And you always want to make sure that you update your resume specifically to match keywords in a job description. It's a really good idea to have a solid framework for a resume. So I have what I call like a generic resume with all of my skills, and it's formatted correctly. And then in job searches and when you see job descriptions, you can tailor it to match each job that you're going for. It should never be a static document where you send the same resume to multiple employers when you're applying for different jobs. It just won't stand out. Next slide. All right, the good news is that whether you think you do or not, you have a lot of marketable skills. Your challenge as a job seeker is to figure out how to communicate those skills you've got to the employers who are looking for candidates just like you. So you want to stay focused on all you have to give, not what you're looking to get. Think about all the hard skills and soft skills that you've had and that you've developed and used in your past jobs. So just in case I have anyone who's not sure, a hard skill is something like technology or software or systems. Soft skills are things like customer service, building relationships, communication. And chances are you have a little bit of both that you can highlight. If you've been out of the workforce for a while, think about the skills that you've developed during your time outside the workforce too. Volunteer time counts. Many people volunteer for their churches or organizations, and that is still tangible work that you can provide evidence of skills. And then next, you want to compare those skills to the skills that are in most demand for the field you're interested in. You can do this by checking out the job descriptions that are of most interest to you. What are the skills that they list that are required or desired in the candidates they're hiring for? And then you'll notice, is there a big gap between the skills that you have and the skills that they're seeing or they're saying are in most demand? If so, don't let it discourage you. Just let that be the beginning of your professional development journey. So let's look at some examples on how to do this. So analyze job descriptions. Here's a sample of a job description for a content creator. You'll notice that the job description, we have many of the keywords highlighted in red, all of the key responsibilities and skills, which are called keywords. and then how to align yourself with those. Let's look at the example of a resume. Here is Rachel Green. Any of you know where I'm getting Rachel Green from? Just curious. So you can see that Rachel has also highlighted in red, identified the skills and matched them to the job description. She's used words that are relevant for her. And a good example that I have is, let's say a job description were to call for Excel experience. And in your resume, you say proficient in all the Microsoft Office suite. The application tracking system is not going to pick that up because they're looking for the word Excel. So really looking at these skills and keywords that are in the job description and finding ways to use them in your bullet points in your resume and in your professional profile are the key to making yourself stand out. So this is something you can't force. If you don't have the experience, it's going to be difficult to demonstrate a fit for the role. So there are times when you may have to learn. There may be some things you need to, actions you need to take to learn the skills necessary if you're doing a complete career change. Next slide, please. All right, I love this quote by Tracy Ellis Ross. And she said it best when she said, I'm trying to allow the space between where I am and where I want to be to inspire me and not terrify me. And that just really resonates with me because I'm not sure who all we have on the call, but I know our SHE leaders are here, and women often don't apply for jobs if they don't meet every single check mark on the job description. And we're really doing ourselves a disservice because we can have a few of the main skills and we can fill those gaps in with knowledge and learning. So let any skills gap that you identify be your starting block to continue that professional development and apply anyway, and you'll get the great experience of interviewing and knowing what they're looking for. All right, so this is you, Christina, right?
Yep. Thank you. All right, so let's talk about choosing an effective resume design, and then we'll also get into the components of formatting your resume. When it comes to formatting, you'll need to make sure that it's going to look good to the human eye. You want to get it past that applicant tracking system that Tracy mentioned earlier, and make sure that it's landing on a real person's desk, like the recruiters, and then hopefully it goes next to the hiring manager and you get that interview. So some things to keep in mind when you are doing your resume is to make sure there's ample white space. And we'll talk about that in just a minute. You don't want to jam pack your entire career into one page with zero margins. It's not fun for anybody to look at that, and it's probably not going to make its way past that ATS that we talked about. And make sure that you're using your margins and your spacing well so that it's not too much white space, but it's enough to make it easy to read. And then keep it simple. And we're going to go into those logistics in just a minute here. Just the biggest thing is to remember that you want to have your resume stand out, but you don't want to over design it, over format it to where it doesn't even make its way past that first step. So let's look at some examples. All right. So here we see two examples of a resume, very drastically different designs, right? So in the Q&A, can you tell me which one you think has a better design and why? Is it the one on the left or the one on the right? Oh, and Rebecca mentioned as a manager, she agrees with the light space so much. Yes, I've had some resumes that I've looked at that it's like I needed a magnifying glass because it was small font and so crowded, it was hard to read. Let's see here. Rebecca says, I like the right. It's easier to read. Interesting. Anybody else want to provide what they think is better? All right. Well, I do agree. I think the right is aesthetically more pleasing. It stands out. It's pretty. There's not a ton to read. However, The resume on the right is actually not the recommended design. And the reason why is it is overly formatted, and that can cause problems when it's scanned through those applicant tracking systems that we keep talking about. Even though this candidate is applying for a graphic design job and that's in the creative industry, you don't want to spend too much time designing your resume. Instead, you really want to showcase why you're the right fit for the job and really stand out with the skills and qualifications to get you the job. So instead, you should be spending more of the time writing that amazing content that tells your story and why you're the best fit versus designing your resume to where it might not even make it past that first step when you're actually really qualified. And let's see, we have some more in the chat.
And Christina, I just want to add too that in that overly formatted design, it's beautiful, but there's not a lot of space to put the things you're experienced in and to list your skills. It's very minimal space for actual content.
Yes, thank you, Tracy. That's a really good call out. As you see, they only have 3 skills listed on there. It's creative the way they listed it, but you really can't tell a lot about this person by looking at their resume or why they're qualified. I agree with you in the Q&A. I like the look of it better, but when it comes to who's probably going to get pushed through each step of the way, it's going to actually be the resume on the left. And we're going to talk about that in just a minute about the formatting and why that would make it through. But as you see just at a quick glance, that resume actually outlines the professional profile that Tracy mentioned earlier. It lists the skills and then details on those skills. So they have web development, but then they talk about all of the systems that they use and are an expert in essentially. They have the tools listed versus just saying the programs and not, you know, their expertise within those programs. And then you see how they outline their experience. So let's go ahead and get into that a little more. So on this, we talked about how you have your design and then how formatting matters. And I know Rebecca mentioned she loves the white space. I think everybody does. Rebecca did mention maybe somewhere between the two of them. Absolutely. I think if you're able to find a good compromise without overly designing it, but maybe just sprucing it up a little bit while keeping those key components that we mentioned, where you can really list your experience, your background, and your skills so that they can see why you are qualified for it. Keep in mind, too, you'd want to stay away from templates. They have a lot of templates and they all look terrific. And most people think that that's going to be easier than starting with a blank Word document. However, the problem with the templates is they usually have embedded tables and content controls, and then that can also cause problems for the tracking system. And it might not even make its way through. It's also really challenging to make changes to your resume later because the templates are so difficult to edit sometimes. So keeping your design simple, using color and moderation is key. Like you mentioned, maybe you add a little color or maybe a little image, but I would still be really careful with images because again, you have to worry about that system. Keep it simple. If you're in, say, a conservative industry, like an accounting firm or a law firm, anything corporate, very professional and conservative, you're probably going to want to stick with just a black and white basic resume. Maybe you could use the dark blue since that's still really professional and you know, it's simple, it doesn't stand out too much, but you're not going to want to put a bunch of color on. Now, if you're applying for, say, a hip startup company or something that's more in the creative industry, you might be able to add a little more pizzazz to the resume. The main thing to keep in mind is it going to make it through that applicant tracking system? If it will, then great, get a little more creative while still making sure you have space to highlight your skills. Keep it simple, like we talked about. I think that's the biggest thing we can emphasize. And then use 0.5 or 1-inch margins all around. That way, again, you're creating the white space. It's not too scrunched in there. but also it's easier to fill up the page if you use 1-inch margins if you don't have as much information to put. Maybe you don't have a ton of job experience or history if you're going for a newer job, getting right out of your degree or something like that. You might use the 1-inch margin in that case. And create clearly labeled sections. You want to make it easy to spot your information. It's just like anything you're reading. When you go and you read an article or you're in a magazine and you look at the headings, you have an idea of what that section is going to be about. It's the same with your resume. You want to make sure it's clearly labeled so they can spot that information right away. A lot of times recruiters do not spend a lot of time looking at resumes either. So they say the most important information should be towards the top because they read from top to bottom. It's also customary for your name to be in a larger font along with the headings, and then the main content is going to be in a smaller font size. Avoid those dense paragraphs. Bullets are your best friend when it comes to a resume. You do not want to have lengthy paragraphs. Again, it is harder to read. So instead, use your bulleted statements to make it easy to scan and to identify why you're qualified for that job. And like we talked about, balance the white space so it's not cluttered. And then there's fonts that they say are recommended to use for your resume, like Arial, Calibri, Times New Roman. Those are probably the most common fonts that you should use. Any sans serif fonts, those are the best because they're easy to read and they're also available on everybody's computer usually. And you don't want to download a font and use that because they might not have that font in their system, so it's going to come through incorrectly. And then lastly, you'll want to stick to probably a size of a 10 or 12 for the body of your resume, and then the 14 to 18 for the headers and the name, like we talked about, where you're going to increase the font. See, it looks like, just making sure we didn't have any new stuff posted in the Q&A. All right. It's also important to make sure your information is consistently aligned. So as a best practice, you should list the company name and the job titles in the left margin, and then always place the dates on the right side. If you place them on the left, what happens is that can also, surprise, cause an issue with the applicant tracking systems. Who knew there were so many roles to make it through that first step, right? So just keeping in mind where you're going to align your dates and then where you're going to have the other information on the left. When you're providing your name and your contact information, think about how much space you're using. Kind of like we talked about earlier with the white space. If you have a ton of experience, then you're going to use this format on the top because it conserves the space. But let's say you don't have as much experience, then you would use the bottom one because that fills up more of the space in your resume. Another very, very important call out is use a professional email address. You'd be surprised by some of the email addresses that we've seen, and you definitely want to have a professional one. So the best way to go is just use your first and your last name for your email. And then if you've updated your LinkedIn profile, then you can include that. There's even a way through LinkedIn where you can shorten your LinkedIn address so that it doesn't take up a lot of space. The normal one's pretty lengthy. And then of course, if you have a portfolio, professional website, or anything else that you want to use to showcase your skills, then you would include that there as well. So now let's talk about all the ways that you can list your experience. There are a ton of different ways you can format this, and it really is going to be specific to that person and what their career history or job history looks like. Some of us may have been at our company for 10 plus years. I know I've been at this company for 14, and Tracy, you're going on how many years now?
21.
21. Wow. So in those scenarios, the way you list out your experience might look different than, say, somebody that is just coming out of college, entering their first job in their career, or maybe somebody that has had multiple jobs. So let's look at some of those examples. When you're looking at the subdates format, this is useful because, or I'm sorry, let's start with the reverse chronological. I skipped ahead there. This one's the most common. This is where you're going to start with your most recent experience, and then you'll work your way backwards. So most people go with this format. It's pretty simple, straightforward, and easy to read. This one is the subdates format. So this is also useful though. It works well if you've had 2 or more positions in the same company. There you can list the company along with the total time spent there, followed by your positions, and then the dates of employment for that particular role in the parentheses. So here you see that they worked at Ship Now, but they were a sales manager from June until now. And before that, they were a print clerk. So it's an easy way to show your experience at that company without taking up a ton of room as well. Another approach is the stack and summarize format. So this works well if you've had, say, multiple promotions in the same company. So this might be more than 2 positions like we saw in that last one. When you're using the stack and the summarize one, that is great if you've advanced to higher level roles, but you don't want to waste space on that resume, especially because sometimes your experience may be similar in a lot of those roles. And so you don't need to continue to kind of repeat that experience from those lower level roles. Instead, you would stack your position titles on top of one another, and then you include those sub dates for each role. And underneath those stacked positions, you'll write just a brief paragraph that summarizes your career progression and then those key responsibilities in each role. And in Q&A, while we're going through these, would you like to share what kind of format you use or that you think might be best? Another one is the relevant experience. That's for a career change. So this lets you bring the most relevant experience to the very front of your resume. And then you can also name it according to the type of experience you're presenting. So an example might be marketing experience or counseling. And that lets you group similar experiences together all under the same heading. This works really well for someone that might be making a major career change so that they're able to show their most relevant experience first. And then after that section, you can add an additional or other experience section that outlines the rest of the work history. Who knew there were so many formats, right? And then this is the last one, the job title format. So this is really great if you've held, say, one type of position for years, but then you worked for many organizations on a short-term basis, or maybe it was like a contracting type of situation where you're contracted to do projects. This is normal in some of those types of industries. So this helps you to reduce the appearance of being what they might call a job hopper. Instead, it just shows, you know, all the experience you have to present in a really nice way on your resume. So it also allows you to put your job title first, and then underneath that, you can list all the multiple organizations that you have had that role in. The date range can show how long you've been doing that type of work for instead of the length of time at that specific company as well. So that also helps reduce that appearance of job hopping. So after going through all of this, I think the best question to ask is, can a stranger tell what job you're fit for from the top third of your resume? How I'd mentioned, they're going to start out at the top right. You want to make sure it's going to get noticed, and creating that strong opening like Tracy mentioned with your professional profile, or if you don't have a professional profile, we recommend it. If you're not going to use one, then you really want your experience to stand out. So be on the lookout for our Spotlight course next month on February 16th from 6 to 7 p.m. where we're actually going to talk about creating a LinkedIn profile, because that's another way to kind of connect all those pieces together, especially if you're going to be listing that on your resume. Oh, it looks like maybe we have something new in the Q&A. So Rebecca said, if you've been in your current company for a while in multiple positions for a long time, and previous experience may not be as impressive, such as short term with companies, would you recommend the stack plus summarize subdates or remain reverse chronological? Oh, and you're fine. That made sense. Tracy, do you want to answer that one?
Yeah, I think that stack and summarize is the best approach. That's how my resume is updated as well. When you've been somewhere for a very long time, and in my position, I could have used any example because I started at an entry-level position and now I am in a leadership position for that same department, if you will. So stacking and summarizing is definitely a great option, and it avoids you having to list the roles or the job duties that you had in those entry-level jobs. So that would be my advice.
Thank you, Tracy. I agree with you as well. I think that that's easiest approach, and that's also how I've done my resume. Okay, let's go ahead and let's talk about identifying your skills. So we've told you everything to put on there, but it'd probably be helpful if we tell you, how do you identify those skills, and then how do you formulate it so that it shows your experience in the best way possible on your resume. Does your resume show concrete examples and those tangible results? So we're going to talk about that, and there's some pretty cool ways and formulas that you can achieve that. So in this first example, we're going to look at this barista's experience. In the top one, you can see that it has some examples of what they've done in that coffee house. It's pretty general though, right? Versus when you look at the second one, what is the difference between the two? If you want to post it in Q&A, or if anyone wants to talk, then we can unmute you as well. Or you can raise your hand to unmute to ask a question as well. So someone said they like the bold. Oh, Rebecca. If we can unmute her, please. Perfect.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay, cool. I hope that I feel like I'm the only one participating over here, guys. Whoever else is in here, come on.
Thank you, though. We love it.
I think like the topics that they're talking about, while the topics on the top are important, operating cash register, you know, that definitely stands out. However, I think contributed to stores Yelp rating. I've never seen something like that before, but that's impressive to enter on their enhanced other new hires to, you know, speed up their proficiency. I think those are interesting things to point out on the resume. That would definitely stand out to me.
Absolutely. And thanks for sharing, Rebecca. It definitely, the second one stands out way more, right? So if, say you had, these were two different candidates applying for this coffee house, who do you think they're going to hire? Probably going to hire the person that's on that bottom example, right? There, the experience section has those detailed descriptions, and it includes specific examples of results, like you mentioned, Rebecca. It even gives those numbers of the Yelp rating. It talks about ways they improved the speed of the service, how they created efficiencies. So it's a great way to really show not just what you did, but what the outcome was from it. Anytime you can bring in data or any type of stats to show why you were successful in whatever that action is that you're listing, it's definitely recommended. All right. So let's talk about how you convert tasks into accomplishments. Just like we talked about before, adding those numbers. If you have numbers, include them. How much? How many? Share details. How did you do that? How was it accomplishment? And say why it matters. You know, in that prior example, why did the Yelp rating matter? Because you know that they were really good at customer service, right? And so you're probably going to get some repeat customers, and you can count on that barista to do a good job. So here's some examples of how you can do that. So in this first example, it says developed a leadership program for frontline employees. That sounds nice, but what was the result of it? How did they do it? So if you look at the second example, masterminded and executed a growth and development program supporting over 70 employees, resulting in 15% of participants securing their job of choice. Which one do you think is going to stand out more? I didn't know if anyone posted. Sorry, I'm trying to keep this chat open and looking. It's definitely going to be after. You're right, Rebecca. That one tells us so much more about the development program, what the outcome was, and wow, 15% were able to secure their job of choice. That's huge, right? And that's going to create some loyalty in that program as well, or in that company, I should say. Let's look at another one. So the first example, assembled a cross-functional team to implement an engagement committee versus assembled a cross-functional team to implement an engagement committee to find resolutions for pain points between departments. Why do you think that second example stands out more? And again, feel free to raise your hand or post in the Q&A.
Well, I'll add some comments. This is Tracy, and I think that this is a good example of number 2, which is sharing details. And there may not be numbers involved, and that's okay, but it does show a lot of value add here in the after.
Thank you, Tracy. Exactly. And they're able to see what was learned in those trainings, what makes it much more valuable than just being general. And then here you see they participated in optional company trainings versus learned advanced Excel skills, PowerPoint design, and writing effective communications through organizational trainings. So that way we're able to really see the value stand out a lot more in that example and know what did they learn? What did they, upskill in when they did that training? And that would be definitely a lot more valuable if those are the skills they're looking for in those employees. Another thing to keep in mind is unpaid experience counts too. Oftentimes, people think that they only can list paid experience. However, there are some jobs where you can talk about volunteer experience and it is very relevant. So in this example, they talked about their experience as a volunteer because it relates to their goal of getting into the counseling field. So instead of just mentioning volunteer work, they were able to highlight those specific examples of the counseling related skills in a professional setting. Even though it was unpaid, they still developed those skills and they still worked in that industry. A lot of times, I think we've all heard this or even said it ourselves is, well, how am I going to, the job requires experience. Well, how am I going to get experience if they won't hire me without experience? So this is one of those ways that you can do that is volunteering, doing internships, anything like that, that exposes you to that industry. All right, and this is probably my favorite formula because it makes crafting your resume so much easier. So a helpful formula that you can use is when you do the action verb plus the description of what you did plus the outcome or the purpose. using this formula made, at least for me, making my resumes, it made it so much better because I was able to just follow those tips and you plug it in and then you create that, action and outcome like we talked about. Eliminate the personal pronouns. I know someone had mentioned that earlier in the other example was they eliminated the word I. You definitely want to eliminate that personal pronoun when you can and avoid passive phrases like responsible for, duties include, etc. So here is another example of the action verb was developed and trained. What they did was 20 procurement agents on effective negotiation and purchasing strategies. And the outcome was that they cut expenses by an average of 10% across 75 restaurants. That's huge. So being able, again, pulling in those numbers, that data to show how impactful they were. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see this before, Rebecca. You said, how would you know what the before means? Which example was that referring to? And we could unmute you too. The first one.
Sorry, yeah, it was the first before after example that you gave. I don't recall the verbiage, but my apologies.
No, that's okay. I don't know if I can get back there the way we had it.
It was like the one about the engagement committee.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, the before was like super generic about an engagement committee. It's like, well, what does that mean? Like, what did you do? I don't know. If I was reading your resume, that's what I would think.
Exactly. It was very generic and okay, so you did that, but to what end? Like, what does that even
Right.
mean? Right? Yeah, I
Yeah.
get it. Good point.
Absolutely. It doesn't really tell you anything, right? It's kind of like the buzzwords too. I know Tracy had kind of mentioned, soft skills, hard skills. It's the same thing with the buzzwords they talk about is saying, I was a team player, I'm detail oriented. Well, that's great. Anybody can say that, but you have to quantify it on how were you detail oriented and what was the outcome. And using this formula helps you do that. Because you're absolutely right. You don't really know much from that example you mentioned, Rebecca. Here's another one where they talked about coaching 35 frontline managers on facilitating difficult conversations to develop their skills in managing conflict. That's huge, right? Because in a leadership role, you have to be able to have really strong conflict resolution skills. So being able to show what they did and how that could help 35 managers is a big deal. And then the last one is an example where they managed a caseload of 30 high-profile clients to ensure growth in their organizations through effective marketing campaigns. So again, they showed they were able to create growth in that organization, how they did it, and the impact of a caseload of 30 high-profile clients. Do you find this formula to be helpful, or what do you think about this when you're crafting your resume experience?
I feel like I feel a little bit bad because I feel like I'm the only person speaking up. I don't know how many people are in here, but I think this part has been helpful. The action verb, what you did, purpose and outcome. Personally, I was kind of blessed, like when I was going through college and getting my associates, for some reason, every class it was an extracurricular, extra credit. You submit your resume, they critique it. So I've gone through a lot of information that we've learned here today, but this part stands out to me for sure.
That's terrific. And don't feel bad at all, Rebecca. We're just so glad that you're able to provide feedback and share your experience.
I don't want to steal the spotlight from anybody.
Oh, no, you're fine. You're fine. And anyone else that wants to speak up, you're more than welcome to raise your hand as well. But that's great that you were able to do that. And you said in one of your classes you worked on that?
It was, for some reason, it seemed like every class. I mean, that was a really long time ago, so I don't remember precisely, but there was many times when I was working on that degree, it was for paralegal studies, and I'm in sales now, haha. But it seemed like every class, they would have us submit their resume, the teacher would, critique it and everything. So I felt, I feel very confident about it, but I definitely did take some stuff away from today. And I'm looking at my resume right now, like, how can I implement some of this stuff?
That's terrific. I'm so glad to hear that. And that's such a great way too. I love that they integrated that in a course. I wish they did that in a lot more courses.
Christina, we're at the 5-minute mark, just to give you a heads up.
Okay, thank you. Well, that's it for my part. So this brings us to our last slide where Tracy's going to close it out for us.
Yes, I hope you found a lot of value in this. Over the past few years, it's really normal to feel a little bit disconnected, and I want to talk about growing your network and how important that is. And I do hope you'll join us in February for the LinkedIn session, because that's where we're really going to detail here. But I just want you to know that it's not too late to reactivate or even grow your professional network. Maybe you had a lot of relationships and connections when we were all live, and maybe the pandemic stalled that. But definitely that you can reconnect, and it's not too late. You might be surprised how many organizations are hosting virtual events or meetup groups that exist. Chambers of Commerce, I go to all of those here in Phoenix for Women's Group, and I just meet so many cool people. And that's usually where the best job leads come from. So show up, whether it's in person or in a virtual conference. Start getting yourself out there by willing to show up, even if you don't know anybody there. And if you have an existing network, but you haven't really kept in touch, it's never too late to reach out and ask. Many people would be thrilled to help you, thrilled to hear from you, and you might just be able to reciprocate someday. So if you're looking for companies or network connections and companies you'd be interested in, don't be shy about asking for a referral. Get to know someone from that organization. Easy to find them on LinkedIn, and then send them a message. Get to know any advice they have for the role, and then ask for a referral if you meet the job qualifications, or most of them. And then at the end of the day, just remember, you don't get there faster by doing it alone. So don't be afraid to ask for the support you need. Odds are is that in your next position, you will pay it forward if you haven't already. So Christina and I would love for you to connect with us on LinkedIn. And we're both really easy to find, except Christina's last name is Ruppel. It's not Thiel. That's her maiden name. So we'd love for you to connect with us. You can also follow me on Instagram at TJDESOTO, TJ DeSoto. And we have 3 minutes left for questions. So if we go out of screen share, Christina, and we can answer any questions that people might have. Let's see, I see something in the chat. Oh,
Rebecca
okay.
posted in there. She said she's new to LinkedIn and would like all that information. So
Great. Yep,
love
we will
that.
be sending that out. And we just can't thank you enough for coming. We hope these spotlight courses are a success. We hope you gain some bit of knowledge out of them, and can't wait to see you in our next live session for the She Leaders on the call. And for those of you who joined outside of She Leaders, we're very grateful that you're here. So thank you, and I hope you all have an amazing evening.
Thank you, guys.
You're welcome,
So
Rebecca. See you
much.
soon.
Have a wonderful evening, everybody. Thank you. For
You
your time.
too. And I will say, I'm going to recruit and bug all the Achieve She Leaders to make sure they're there next time.
Good. Thank you. Thank you. We are recording this. Yeah.
All right. Bye, ladies. Thank
Love
you.
your
so much.
participation. Thank you.